why don't we get started? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to come down from Broomfield for me and chat with you all. There's food and soda and whatnot in the back, so please feel free to eat as much as you can. I don't want to take it back with me, or I'll be eating pizza for 3 hours on the way. So again, thank you for the invitation. My name is Joe Pereira. I'm the Deputy Director of the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate. I have some cards right here that folks want to grab at the end. Feel free. I'm here tonight to come and talk about where we are with the Black Hills electric rate case, and specifically to talk with you all about how to provide the most meaningful public comment for the Public Utilities Commission hearing here next week, and then the remote. So the hope here is not to have me talk at you too long. It's really to try to have a conversation. If you have questions, whether they're basic or in the middle or kind of in the weeds, I'm happy to try to go through those as much as I can. If I don't have an answer for you today, I'll do my best to get that written down and get back to you with an answer as well. Okay, any questions on that to start, or should we get rolling? Okay, so let me tell you about our office first. So we have this big, long name. We're a small little office that sits within the Department of Regulatory Agencies, but we don't regulate anything. We're the consumer advocate. We take advocacy positions in front of the Public Utilities Commission, the federal government, and courts. And so our first and foremost mission is to represent the public interest before those entities. What is the public interest? It's a hard one to pin down. Hopefully it's the public's idea of what helps them thrive, what helps you thrive, what supports your communities, what reflects the wishes and desires of your community. Okay? We also have, like many statutes do, a laundry list of all the interests and things we're supposed to consider and represent. So after the public interest, we represent residential customers, small business customers, and agricultural customers in those same venues. And then statute tells us that in our advocacy, we're to consider rates and charges, give due consideration to statutory decarbonization goals, just transition, environmental justice, and the short and long-term impacts of decision making. So that's a lot, right? And oftentimes those could compete, right? Some things might cost a lot in short term but have long-term benefits. You know, decarbonization might cost money and not be the most bottom line. And so we're trying at all times to weigh those interests in the case that we put forth before the Public Utilities Commission. Just to give you a scope of our office, right now we have 9 individuals that work in our office full-time. We have additional jobs open, and then we're represented by 5 lawyers from the Attorney General's office. We're their only client, and so that's our team. In an average year, we're probably involved in about 70 cases or so before the Public Utilities Commission. It's pretty heavy workload. Things like rate cases are, kind of our bread and butter work. This is where consumer advocates really were tasked and started. Our office has been around for 40 so years, and it really came about as a way to say, hey, the costs of utilities are rising, customers have concerns. Unfortunately, that 40-year trend is still going up, and so this is one of the big challenges I think we're all talking about. So why am I here? I'm going to try to be an educational resource for you all as we move through to the public hearing. I know your local officials have weighed in the official case, but we're getting to the part of this proceeding where it's really important that the public weighs in and gives the commissioners, the best information that they can get about how this case affects you. And so I'll do my best to answer your questions, to educate you, to help you feel more confident in those discussions. I'm going to elaborate a bit on where we are with the Black Hills rate case, what they have recently filed testimony again, and so try to give you a brief update about where does the case sit. I want to talk about the process moving forward, give you a little background on the PUC so it's not so like amorphous, it's not as big a mystery so you can understand what's going on there. And then we'll talk about some things that, in my experience, our experience in the office, will help give you the tools for the most meaningful public comment you can make. Okay? All right, so kind of hit on this already, but we're going to talk about the basics of a rate case. Why are we here? What is the Public Utilities Commission doing? We'll talk about a couple important points about Black Hills' rebuttal case. We'll try to develop an understanding of what's going to happen here and then provide you some tips. Okay, so what is the PUC? Right, this is important, right? They're coming down and they're going to have a meeting here in Canyon City. What does that mean? Why would they do that? All right, this is a regulatory body established to oversee utility service in a variety of areas. So this is an electric case, but they regulate investor-owned gas utilities. They do lots of transportation work. When City Council wants a new railroad traffic arm somewhere around, believe it or not, they're involved in those discussions, and taxis, if those exist much anymore, and telecommunications and whatnot. So they're a bigger scoping regulatory body. They are statutorily mandated to give paramount consideration to the public interest. And I kind of hit on that. What does that mean? Well, they're the ultimate arbiters of what the public interest is in this case, right? They're going to decide based on all the facts that the outcome that they reach will be the public interest. It functions as a quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial body. So they get all their direction on what they're supposed to do from the legislature, right? Regulate electric utilities. Decarbonize an electric utility by this date. Consider the public interest. All of that comes from law, and then they interpret whatever the big laws say and make it meaningful for the utility to enact. All right, it's quasi-judicial because they sit behind a desk and they make a decision, right? They hear a case, they weigh the facts, and they're going to be the judge and submit an order. And I think when they come down for the public hearing, they're mostly going to be acting in that quasi-judicial role, right? They're mandated by the legislature to hold public hearings and get public input, but they're going to be here acting as a judge. And so this is going to be, I think, one of the little quirks that sometimes is a little, maybe grinding on folks that feel what's happening to them with electric rates or decision making is, they're here to listen as a judge would listen. They're not going to communicate back and forth. Commissioner, I have a question about this. I'm sorry, I'm here to listen. I'm not going to be able to ask you that, right? And this is going to be kind of one of those weird functions. And so think about them working as a judge right now, and maybe put yourself in the place of I'm making an argument to them, right? And that's maybe a good way to start thinking about, what's going to happen for these public hearings. So The PUC is administered, or the PUC is 3 governor-appointed commissioners. They're confirmed by the Senate and represented by a large staff that have lots of roles. Some are advisors, some argue in front of them, some help with communications and research. So a big entity. I think the PUC is 100 plus individuals. Okay, so who are our commissioners? Our commissioners, as I mentioned, have all been appointed by Governor Polis. 2 are Democrats. 1 is an unaffiliated voter. Okay, they kind of come from a broad range of experience. Our Chairman Blank, is a former solar developer. He's an economist by trade, long history working in the utility industry. Commissioner Gilman is a small business owner. She served on the board of directors for Holy Cross Energy, so she has a lot of experience in cooperative electricity and kind of all that. So she's from the Vail Valley, Eagle area. Commissioner Plant is our newest commissioner. He's a former legislator. He was the former director of the governor's energy office under Bill Ritter. And so you can see these commissioners have, a good understanding of energy policy in Colorado. They have, different focuses and different experiences, and as you would guess, they have as judges, they have an interesting dynamic in that, and judges and public officials, they have an interesting dynamic in that they can't communicate with each other when they're not in a public forum, right? So they're kind of sequestered, and so they read the records and hear the information, but there's no behind the scenes dealing, right? So they all have different sensibilities and they all have different interests, and technical testimony or technical delivery for public hearing may interest one, and the actual impact on your family or on your community might be of interest to another, and then they will get together and kind of have these different conversations on how to think about it. Any questions on our PUC? Okay, so what is an elect? Yes, I think we need to get the microphone, right?
I can talk loud. It's more so for the people online so they can hear okay.
When they have those conversations in public, because they can only have, the 3 commissioners can only have conversations between them in a public forum, I think that's what you just said.
I did.
Are there sometimes events, venue, whatever, where that's all they do, so that they're not really, it's not a part of a hearing where they've just heard some testimony of this, that, or the other and discuss it? It can be just, okay, just like your weekly meeting, your Tuesday meeting, you're going to go around the table and each of you comment on A and then comment on B and comment on C?
This is a good question. The answer is yes, kind of. So we'll get into process, but the commissioners hold on Wednesdays, similar to your commissioners. They'll hold a regularly scheduled meeting where they'll have an agenda and they'll talk through things. And so sometimes in that forum, if they post a discussion, they'll have the discussion there. And then also, after the hearing and all the evidence is collected in this case, they will schedule at least one, but likely multiple deliberations where they'll all publicly come together and they'll talk through a lot of these issues. Sometimes they make a decision there, and sometimes they'll say, okay, let's talk again. So that's what I mean by kind of, is so there's a couple different forums. Even when they're talking, sometimes they don't make a decision and want to talk some more a different day. So we'll go through some of that process piece a little bit too. So what's a rate case? It's a discretionary, and what I mean by that is that a rate case is initiated by the utility. Sometimes the commission will order a utility to file a rate case by this date, or an additional extension of that rate case, but 90% of the time, the utility decides when it's going to make that decision. And so in this case, right, Black Hills hasn't filed a rate case in 8 years, and that's at their decision, right? So it's a phased and litigated forum where the PUC makes a decision about the shape and the form of utilities rates. Okay, and it's phased. What I mean by phased is there are two components. One is they're going to determine the revenue requirement for the utility. And the revenue requirement is, how much does that utility need to operate? Dollar signs, right? How much does that utility need to operate until its next rate case? But as I mentioned, we don't necessarily know when the next rate case is. So that's the first piece. So imagine they're going to bake the pie. Or pizza. We're going to bake the pizza.
I had a question. When they go before the commission, how many times can they change what the rate is that they think they're going to need? I'm serious, because it's been a moving target even for customers. We've gotten several. Not only do I serve on council, so I get a lot of information about this, but as a user, I've gotten several different messages from them about what their rates are going to be. And I mean, they're totally different. Don't they have to turn it? It can't be a moving target, can it?
Maybe. So this is an interesting question. Just like as a process standpoint, and then we can talk maybe some specifics about what happened here is when a utility files a rate case, it has what's called a notice requirement. And so there are all these rules that tell the utility, here's how you notify your customers. Here's the timelines, and here are the numbers and whatnot. And in this proceeding, Black Hills issued a notice by the rules. It turns out that the numbers and whatnot that they issued in their first case were not right. And so some parties, including the parties that are represented here, brought this issue to the commission and said, we don't think it's right that they noticed and used the wrong numbers. And so the commission took that up in one of their meetings, and they had a discussion, and they had some advice from legal counsel. And the timing of it was such that they were going to and now have issued what's called a rebuttal case, which is this is their change in their original numbers, right? The first thing they wanted to ask for. And so they've been ordered to reissue notice and I guess they've agreed that notice will now reflect they've agreed, it will reflect the new numbers in the rebuttal. But that may not be the final number, and that's, I think, the hard or loose answer to your question is there may be other changes in this proceeding, or there are other avenues that could lead to that. There could be, actual changes in the case. There could be proposals from other parties, settlement, or ultimately the decision from the commission that would change those numbers.
I hope this is a good time to ask. I have a question about the notice. The first notice that they sent, they mailed, as I understand it, to every customer, and that was in mid-June. So we got that in the mail, that paper notice that then several months later, PUC staff and others discovered had multiple errors in it. I understand, and I listened to this commissioner's weekly meeting on November 6th, so not that long ago. I understand that the commissioners ordered, and I believe it's in their written order, that the company is required to mail a new notice. But the company had asked for permission, I guess you'd say, to email it to customers for whom they have email addresses and then mail to others. I wonder if they're really going to mail. I don't think everyone has, but I have received an email with a link to the new notice that's based on the numbers that they filed in the rebuttal testimony. But is anyone going to raise that, any party in the case, I guess I should say, going to raise the question about the commissioners ordered you to mail a new notice and you're not mailing it? At least that's what we suspect so far.
It's my understanding that they're required to mail every customer that notice, and
So if they don't, then what happens?
if they don't, then we will go. All the parties will go
Okay.
back to the commission. They've already suffered some penalty for messing up the first time, which is the mailing and the posting in the newspaper, and all of that is at shareholders' expense this time. I imagine, I mean, I'm surprised to hear this. I'll definitely follow up. But this time I would imagine if they didn't mail it, or if they did something wrong, it would be right for parties like ours to not only ask for them to do that at their own expense, but also probably some sort of penalty.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not sure what the deadline is that they're facing, but I would hope that parties take a look at that if there is a hard deadline, and if it doesn't happen. But I have my suspicions since I got an email instead of something in the mail.
Yeah.
The deadline is supposed to be tomorrow.
So I'll follow up on that and make sure that we follow up on that. I mean, in some ways, the question could be raised like why snail mail these days, or why in the newspaper, even though we know, newspaper readership is down. The answer is because the idea is every customer is supposed to be reached. And so if we don't kind of still continue these multiple approaches, we're obviously missing somebody. Okay, so I talked about phase one, right? We're gonna bake the pizza, right? This is all the food we have to eat, okay? Phase two allocates amongst customer classes. And so this is how we cut up the pizza amongst residential, business, and industrial customers, okay? So the commission is going to assess the required revenue needed by the utility to provide safe and reliable service in accordance with state law and policies, okay? It sets a framework for the company's operations and their investments, including things like generation, infrastructure, and lots of other initiatives until the rate case, okay? And so the idea here is they'll set essentially the budget for the utility to do things until the next case. It caps what the utility can earn until then, but has this kind of weird quirk that if they cut operations below those costs, guess what happens? The utility gets to keep that money, right? And so we have this weird dynamic in utility regulation where, because they can file whenever they want, when they're coming up short on revenues, they file another rate case real quick. And if they're doing well, maybe they stay out, I don't know, 7, 8 years, right, until they have to come back. And so that's what's going on there with that revenue requirement. Any questions? I'll talk a little bit about what goes into that revenue requirement, but
This is just something that went through my mind. Do they, okay, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. In determining their revenue requirements, do they think about the things that they're going to do in the future? Do they kind of project what they're going to do in the future? Or is that revenue requirement some component of, hey, we've already spent this and now we need to keep our revenue where we think it should be, so we're asking for this revenue retroactively, so to speak?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
it does. The answer is both. And the slide after this one, we're going to
Oh,
get
all
into
right.
that. a
Okay,
little.
I jumped ahead.
We're going to get a little bit. No, I mean, that's the perfect question. That's a good logical question. So let's talk about the rate case a little bit before we kind of get into these details and I lose you. So a rate case, as I mentioned, the company files this case, and then there are what are called intervening parties. And so, Canyon City is an intervening party, Pueblo, the UCA, Public Utilities Commission staff. In this case, there's a solar intervener. So it's different parties that represent kind of a wide variety of interests. And then the way this works is the utility puts their case forward and says, this is what we want and this is what we need. And everybody else gets to say, no, I don't think so. Or, yeah, maybe in this part, but not over here. Your revenue ask is too much, or what you want to do with rate design is not, in line with our interests. And so each of those parties puts together a case just like the utility does, and then puts that in front of the commission, and will use lawyers and witnesses to argue and try to persuade the commission that our argument is right. Each intervener in these cases, or each party in these cases, carries a different burden of proof. So it's the utility's job to prove that what they want is accurate, correct, and in the public interest. They carry that burden, right? If they just say, I want to earn this money, and they don't have anything to back it up, then in theory they lose, right? Parties like ours, all we have to show, in theory, is that they didn't meet that burden, right? You didn't show enough data, or your data is not accurate. But if we want them to do something different, then that switches over to us. And so we have to provide evidence, right? They want 30 million, 37 million. We think it's a lower number than that. Here's our analysis. So that switches the burden over to us. Okay? Parties, so Canyon City, the utility, all have 2 chances to provide testimony for the record. So in the case of the utility, they filed their initial case. That's chance 1. And then they get another chance called rebuttal, which is their argument against the first thing that the other parties filed. So in our case, we file answer testimony. And the sequence is utility files its case. We file answer testimony that says, no, we don't like that. Let's do something different. The utility gets a chance to rebut what we said. No, the UCA is crazy, right? They use really strong language that hurts our feelings. We don't want you to adopt it. And then we can also, at that same time, file testimony that opposes other parties. In this case, there aren't really other parties that oppose much of what many of the other parties are saying. And so you don't see, and that's called cross-answer testimony, and you don't see much here. And then there is public comment that also goes into the proceeding. And so throughout this whole process, there's been the ability to submit written public comment, and that is still open and always available until the record closes. And then we have these public comment hearings. So Pueblo has had 2 days of public comments. We have 2 more here coming up, 1 more coming up with you all, and then a remote public comment hearing in December before we move to trial. Okay, so any questions on those? All right, let's get to revenue requirement, I think. Yes, so what goes into the revenue requirement? There's a lot that goes in these little boxes, but believe me, you don't want to know unless you want to go into this industry. But the revenue requirement is the combination of these 5 general categories. So rate base is all the stuff that the utility owns. Okay, and that's really important to think about, like the motivations and why a utility does what it does. Right? It owns power plants and poles and wires and buildings and all of those things. And that's the key component for what it owns. And so, or for how it makes money. And so, to your question, this case and lots of cases are about collecting revenue and including in rate base the stuff that they've built over the last 8 years, right? So they have conducted normal utility activities like put up poles and wires and replace substations and all those things, and now this is the time for them to come collect. And then they get a rate of return on that. And that rate of return is called the return on equity, or ROE. Think of this, it's not a great analogy, but it's kind of like the interest you earn in your bank account. Except their ROEs are way bigger than we get in our savings accounts, right? So this rate of return, is usually in the range of like 8, 9, 10%. And you'll see in the case and, probably like in some newspaper articles and stuff, that they earn a return of 9%, or they earn a return. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's generally to think about what's going on. And so you can see and that rate of return is what goes to the company and the shareholders. Okay, and so you can see, because that's how they earn money, there's a lot of motivation to build rate base, right? And so, getting a new power plant, putting it in an airport when maybe you don't need it, and those kind of things, like a good example of the motivation on why you might do something like this. So that's kind of a backward-looking look. But we also have to figure out operating expenses and taxes and those kind of things. And those are generally forward-looking, right? We know that like employees' salaries might go up in future years, and so we have to account for that. The cost of fuel might go up for trucks and all of those kind of things. Taxes might go up. What is the depreciation of their expenses and those kind of things. And so that's our forward-looking look. And so the commission is going to look at the case and try to determine somewhat of like, what do we do about the backward-looking stuff, and how do we project the forward-looking stuff. Does that get at it? Yeah. Okay. Any questions on that? Yes.
There's something that I'm confused about, and I have been ever since I got involved with our Energy Futures. This is one. Black Hills is one of 2 investor-owned utilities in this state. What is the huge difference in those buckets that's so different between Excel and Black Hills that they have to charge us like 20 to 30% more than, customers with other utilities? That's the part that, as representing people who are, this is very low income community, this is something that I've racked my brain trying to figure out. Have the commissioners or your office ever tried to look at that? What is the difference? Is there a difference?
Yes, I mean, there's obviously a difference between Excel's rates and Black Hills rates.
The buckets, how
Yeah.
are they different?
So I think we here all agree, and so I'll try that they shouldn't be different, or certainly not as different, right? So let me try to explain like generically, because I don't have an answer, and I'm also not the decider for why or who they should be different. But generically, there are a lot of things that go into kind of that broad consideration of rate impact, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. Why are our bills higher than, a customer in public services? Things like decisions around investments, right? I talked about plants and poles. One company can be better at that than another. Sometimes customer bases are larger, so you have to spread costs over more customers, and that kind of smooths out the prices. Some assets are newer or older and different levels of depreciation. Sometimes companies make good acquisition decisions of other companies in other territories, and other companies make bad decisions about acquiring new assets and that kind of thing. And so all of that is what goes into kind of that decision making. I mean, that's really the decision that the commission is it hopefully takes up in this case, right? Is lots of parties have made that argument that it's unfair that neighbors across the street in some cases can have such different rates, and that things like affordability should be considered in making these decisions. I mean, as I mentioned, we have an advocacy case, and I think this is really here for you and not to push what our advocacy is, but we made a case that the traditional considerations here aren't sufficient, and that actually no rate increase is appropriate, in this case as kind of a leveling, right? But the commission will take that up, and they'll try to filter that, and I think you all advocated for a no rate increase as well, and so hopefully we can get some traction on that. Yes, sir.
Sir.
The governor recently sent a letter to many of the Colorado energy leaders about electrification efforts. And in that letter, he said, if done well, these efforts can continue to incentivize economic growth and investment in Colorado. And he also said he wants to emphasize the opportunity to put downward pressure on electricity rates, support clean energy, and further economic success. Is his letter to the PUC going to be taken into account in these considerations?
I believe it will. I think that parties have probably put that in their testimony, and I think actually that one of the entities that's addressed in that letter is the PUC as well. So I do think it will be considered. Okay, so let's do, anyone really interested in revenue requirement anymore? Like, hey, I gotta Okay.
Rate of return.
Rate of return. So interestingly, rate of return is kind of like a focal point on a lot of where interest will be here, but I think the rate base component is really important too. And so, we'll get into kind of some test years and things, but like there are lots of things that move the needle on the cost of electricity and stuff here, and rate of return is one, but there are other pieces too. So I'm going to just kind of quickly go through here because I think this is relatively simple to understand. So I talked about phase 2, right? We're going to slice up the pie. This is how they kind of generally carve this up. These are just model numbers. They don't have anything to do with the case, but essentially they split the costs up by how each customer class influences the cost of service, right? So generally, residential ratepayers kind of contribute a bit more to the peakiness of the system and how they have to build assets and things around that. And so in most utility territories, you'll see, I've only seen one actually that it's another way, that the biggest percentage of the pie goes to residential customers and smaller percentages. But the bigger ones are using more energy and paying more. So it's a kind of interesting thing to think about. Any questions on that? I mean, how we cut it up kind of makes sense. In this case, there aren't like a lot of interest discussing or fighting back and forth about how the pie gets cut. They've generally like uniformly applied rate increases across the customer classes. Okay, so we'll get just into some high level about where we are from Black Hill's filing perspective. Oh, I went too far. Back. All right, here we go. Okay, so they have filed their rebuttal case. Their original revenue deficiency, so this is the amount more that they need, was originally around $37 million. Their new case has proposed that 37 goes down to 25 million. And from our numbers, this equates to a 13% rate increase or 13% increase for them down from, what was it, 2018 before. Now this isn't I want to be clear, like this isn't a 13% increase in rates, right? This is on their revenue increase, okay? How have they done this, right? It's with rate making, it's when you pick the time periods you pick and how you look at the numbers affects the dollar amount. It doesn't all of a sudden mean they wanted 37 million and now they want 25. What we did is we changed some of the numbers and time periods around to capture that amount, okay? And so several parties, our office, PUC staff, had advocated for what's a different test year than they proposed. The test year is the time period that already happened or is happening in which you use to think about those expenses, right? So that backward period of time. So they had a test period that kind of overlapped and had some forecast to it. Some of the other parties said, no, historical test period, only what you've used in the past. It's like us going back and saying, this was our budget last year, right? And we're probably going to have a really similar year, And so we're going to use that budget to try to figure out our costs and stuff next year. It adopted a 13-month average. Sometimes what this does is sometimes at the end of the year, utilities trying to cram a lot of spending in, right? So that, it all falls on that fiscal test. If we go 1 year forward, we get 13 months, kind of smooths that out a little bit more. So they changed the numbers, right? And then they also changed their return on equity requirement. So they were at 10.5% return, right? That's that little times part from our chart before. They moved down to 9.83. And they changed their equity structure. We probably don't want to get into this too much, but the way utilities pay for stuff is sometimes they go to equity markets, and those guys expect bigger returns than if you go to a bank for debt. Okay, and there's a balance between those, and utilities and shareholders always want that equity real high and don't want them to go to the bank as much. So they changed some of these numbers around, and that's how we get to this 25 million amount. All right, still a lot more than zero from our perspective, right? There are still lots of unresolved issues in the case. Things like arguments around return on equity. 9.8 is still the highest return on equity in the state. So these numbers can be moved, and that's what the substance of the rest of the case will be. But essentially, the rebuttal case now kind of sets the marker for no higher than. I'd be surprised if a commission ever went above a lower rebuttal case. And I think they'd be run out of town probably. But there are things like some more technical dollar amount things. There are rate case expense issues. Utilities spend a lot on lawyers and consultants and all of those things. And so that needs to be hashed out. We actually recently have been won a fight that we've been losing for years and years and years around rate case expenses. Traditionally, customers were paying the full cost of the utility to put its case forward. Now we're starting to see splits in consultant costs. All political activities of the utilities now have to come out of rates. The commission has now ordered that investor relations, so all the things they do to make shareholders happy have to come out from rates. So this commission has been good and proactive about implementing legislation around these issues. And there are trackers and how we're going to treat the gas plant and things that still need to be thought about. So don't think about the rebuttal case as this is where we're going to land. There's still a lot of arguments to be made.
So just so I'm clear, at the point that we are now, the company filed its rebuttal. Do the other parties now also file an answer to that, or how does that look between now and the evidentiary hearing?
Yep. That's a great question. So from now until the evidentiary hearing is basically like a quiet time. So this will be the time for everyone else to now think about what the live case is going to look like. So there's a hearing, not a public hearing, a hearing scheduled. And what will happen at that hearing is that the witnesses for different parties will call other parties' witnesses to the stand and cross-examine them. So this is more like what you see on TV, but it's never as exciting as what you see on TV, right? So, the UCA will call a witness from Black Hills that's an expert in ROE, and our lawyers will question, and try to try to break up that burden of proof and try to break holes in their case and try to convince the commission that our position's right. So all the lawyers and all the witnesses will kind of go through that process. And then in addition, the commissioners will ask witnesses questions that interest them as well. And that will fulfill the record. And it's based on all the documents that have been filed to this point and all the live testimony that's given that will make up the basis for how the commissioners make their decision.
So that evidentiary hearing, will that be on YouTube like they do their weekly meetings? And
It will be. All of the public meetings for the PUC is on the Public Utilities Commission YouTube page. Just Google Public Utilities Commission YouTube, and it will pop up. On the Public Utilities Commission website, there is a calendar of all of the hearings, and I am blanking on the hearing date right now. December 5th.
oh, that's when it
No,
starts.
the public hearing is December 5th. The hearing. So I'm going to check.
It's soon after,
It's,
but I don't remember.
I want to say like December 12th, but thanks, Katie. Katie's going to help us out, and we'll get that on. We'll get that on the stream too. But yeah, you could just go on YouTube. You can watch the hearing. There are components that are confidential or highly confidential, and so what happens if you're watching and they're going to have confidential discussion, they'll take a break, they'll go offline, and they'll go in confidential session, and then they'll come back. Okay. So let's talk about what we're actually here for. So here are the public comment hearing dates. So the first is November 19th, so next week, next Tuesday, here. The commissioners will, they'll be here, they'll take public comment. Generally, they will set the amount of time that is given to each individual for public comment. Sometimes they're more flexible, sometimes they're a little more strict. If there's a line out the door, they're probably going to be more strict. I think in this case, that's okay. Let's get a line out the door if we can, right? And as I mentioned, it's not really a back and forth kind of thing, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. In addition, there is a remote public comment hearing on December 5th, and this is done through Zoom. I have the link to the Zoom registration, so it's best to register first, and then you'll get a time so that the commissioners kind of know, and also you don't have to sit on Zoom for a couple hours waiting till it's your turn if it's really busy. Then in addition, there is directions on how to participate either by video or in person, and also directions on how to submit written comment. And I think that's important too. One is if you have a lot to say, you might not get your full 2 cents in the public comment. Some folks just don't want to get up in front of the public and make comment there, and that's fine too. All of the written comment, public speaking comment will be entered, into the record for consideration. One is not given more weight than the other, right? If you want to write, that will be given as much weight as, if you show up. And so I think that's important. It's all the same. There's lots of written public comment already. There was lots of public comment in Pueblo, and so we want to kind of keep that momentum going here. Any questions on this? Anyone want to take a picture, or will these the slides will be posted too? Okay, so we'll go with that. So let's finish up here on, these are, I guess, my tips on how we can, give effective public comment. And then we still have a lot of time, so any other questions, or if we want to go back and whatnot, we can do this. We can do that, and I'm happy to stay, as long as anyone needs. So, public comment hearing. Let's just talk about the atmosphere a little bit. I mean, this is the room, right? So we're already can get kind of familiar with what this is going to look like. Maybe the commissioners are up, on the council bench. Okay, so I don't know. I'm a person that's got to speak, and I don't regularly do public speaking. And people up here, right? Sometimes that maybe is a little intimidating. Okay, so we just got to think about that. We're going to be at a podium over here, and I'm not used to standing behind a podium and this weird microphone thing, and like, do I go like this or do I move it down? Okay, I think it's kind of important to think about like what's the forum. But that being said, there is no pressure here, right? The commissioners understand that the public isn't used to doing this. Right, that they're not lawyers, okay, that they don't do this as a profession, and they really want to hear what you have to say. Okay, so these intimidating pieces, we just kind of got to push those aside, right? They want you to be here, and they want to hear what you have to say. Okay, use natural language, right? Oh, I skipped one because I didn't write it down. Probably write down what you want to say. You don't have to read it, but you probably want to have a couple notes. Because even sometimes when I get up here or I go before the commission, I forget what I want to say. Or I get really in my head and talk a lot about this, and then don't give myself time to talk about this other thing. So make yourself a couple notes at the very minimum. Will keep you kind of on track. Use natural language. No one expects you to be a lawyer. No one expects you to be able to tell the commissioners what revenue requirement is, right? There's no test on the slides or that kind of thing, right? Use your voice, right? Use your experience. They're going to want to hear it that way. My wife is a mental health therapist. If she goes up and tries to talk like a lawyer, that's just not going to work, right? She should talk in her language and her experience. All right, so a couple tips that I have on how you might format this. Tell the commissioners who you are. Yeah, they'll ask you, your name, but that's not who you are, right? This is just your name. Tell them who you are. I've lived in Canyon City for 20 years. My family has been in Canyon for 4 generations. We run a ranch. I'm a mechanic. I work at the local library. Tell them who you are, right? Personalize what you have to say, right? They want to know, I want them, and you want them to know that you're a person that's rooted here, or this is important. This place is important to you, okay? What has been your experience with the PUC? I never heard of the PUC until I heard about this case. I don't know who you are, I hear you're important and I'm counting on you to make a decision. Tell them, where you're coming from with this. What is the impact, or how will the impact of their decision impact you, impact your community? And I think this one of kind of these lists and your prioritizing time is probably the most important, right? And the more specific we can be, I think the better this will resonate, right? I live check to check. At the end of the month, I have $20 left in my bank account. A rate increase of $20 or a bill increase of $20 will make it so that I don't have any money left at the end of the month. Okay, I'm a small business owner and my margin is 1%. I'm just barely getting by, but I provide this to the community. If my bill increases $17 a month, this is what it'll mean for me and my customer, right? I think do your best to personalize to them what this means, right? I've been in business for 20 years. I've always managed, to push through the rates, but I can't do it anymore and I'm gonna have to close, right? Like those type of experiences, those reactions I think are really important, right? This is an important to me thing that, will help this record. Okay? I guess I hit on, kind of both of these, individual level, community level, right? And last, and this is a hard one, right? But I think this matters for the administrative record piece. What do you recommend the commission do? So I recommend that the commission adopt Canyon City's case. Or I recommend that the commission adopt a 0 rate increase. Or finish with what you have with this is what I want you to do. Okay? If you what you're doing here is kind of putting together like a nice narrative, right? Here's who I am, this is what's important to me, this is how it means, and this is what I want you to do. It's like a kind of nice little complete 2, 3-minute, 4-minute story. And that's what they can use as an actual like evidentiary piece, right? So that's what we want to do. On the tail end, I think the commission kind of gets, numb isn't the right word, and I don't want to speak to them, but they kind of get numb to my utility sucks, I hate them, whatever, right? I mean, it's hard for them to act on that. And guess what? There aren't many people that show up at any of these hearings that say, like, I really love my utility. So it kind of blends in there a little bit. It's okay to be upset, right? It's okay to not like your utility. If you got to put it in, I would put it in, but I wouldn't make it the emphasis. I think it's really important to do your best to try to put together a bit of a complete story and ask them for something, right? They're public servants, so if you're asking them for something, hopefully they're reactive to that. Okay, so that's my public comment, but should we talk through some of like how should I do this? I have some concerns, or should I go to the here's my email and phone number slide?
Can I ask another question or two? One maybe that I should have asked earlier is, with this new case, so to speak, that was filed through rebuttal testimony by the company, it took, now I don't know the background on this, but it took from June till October for that first notice to be analyzed by PUC staff and the errors found, and the motion filed on October 18th after answer testimony was filed. So is anyone, or is there even an opportunity to look at this new notice and say, hey, this is perfect this time, or say, no, it still has multiple errors? And is that even a concern on the part of any parties right now?
Well, I think because time is drawing
right
down, we'll have to act fast, right? So knowing that notice is a problem, I'm sure, our team will look at it, as soon as it comes out, I bet your team will as well. You know, so there are procedures. If, say, we found it and we wanted expedited say it was wrong again and we wanted expedited consideration, there's lawyer stuff that could probably handle that.
And if I can ask another question,
Yeah.
I don't mean to not share here, but you mentioned, and I do think it's important to note, that the UCA and other parties have recommended to the PUC that there be no increase granted for all kinds of reasons having to do with the high poverty area and all of those kinds of things. But from the point of view of the case and precedent, if there is any, is there a way to get to no in a case like this? Is there a way, and we can only speculate maybe, is there a way for the PUC to actually get to no on this case? And is there some way the public or parties can help them get to that?
Well, I think that, I mean, we put our case forward to no, and we stand by our case. And other parties did too, and I think that other parties stand by that as well. There are, I was at like the last 4 or 5 days I was at like a really nerdy utility conference, and one of the things that you always hear is rate making is an art and a science. Okay, so there's some science behind it, we went through that, but there's art to this too. And ultimately statute says public interest. And so parties have made a case to say, hey, here's the traditional rate making and this gets you to here. But there are also things like letters from the governor that say affordability is important. There's public comment and parties here that say affordability has to be, primary, and forget about your rate making. And so public support for the idea that you can't stay on this trajectory, I think, is what supports that argument.
Thanks.
So to get, I've read Harrington's initial direct testimony, and Harrington is the lead dog for Black Hills. I've read his initial testimony back in June, and I've read his more recent testimony whenever it was, a few days ago. And from his more recent testimony, I guess that's the rebuttal testimony, he made the case that, well, wait a minute, the UCA is speaking out of two sides of their mouth. They've got Cindy Schoenhout who's saying 0, and then there are other witnesses who are saying, it sounds like, well, if you're going to have an increase, here's the arguments for and against bits and pieces of the testimony. Did I read that correctly? That there's sort of two messages that the UCA is sending?
That's what he wrote.
Yes, I understood what he wrote.
That is not our perspective.
Okay.
The perspective.
Or your intention?
The perspective of, and first I'll say Cindy Schoenhout is the director of our office, right? She's the statutorily directed voice for our advocacy and position. So I think that's important. Like, what the director says is what we say. The challenge, and you've kind of seen here, right, is traditional rate making, right? Traditional rate making approaches always get to a rate increase. I'm been in this area for 10 years, and we have people in our office that have been there for 40 years. And I think the point of our argument, and again, I really want this to be about you all and not our advocacy or trying to defend it or whatnot, is that traditional rate making occurs absent the real life of people, right? We can do all the numbers and calculations we want, but the numbers and calculations don't understand the financial pressures of the communities that are involved here. They don't react to the challenges of groceries going up or the cost of fuel or all of those things. And so that's the science, but guess what? It's not the end-all be-all in this. And that's the case that we've put forward, is public interest isn't just the calculation you do over here. It's all the guidance around affordability, and it's all of the things that communities and whatnot face. And so it doesn't surprise me that a utility would try to characterize, anybody's argument that way. Oh, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. Well, okay. But that's not the argument that's there.
And my second question, a little different. If you want to try, if one of us, me or anyone else, wants to argue against their return on equity, do we have to make a good numeric argument based on all the elements of their cost structures? Or can we just say, both on the affordability front and on frankly, the bad actors that they've been in this process and have previously been. I mean, they lied through their teeth during the Pueblo campaign when Pueblo tried to break away back in 2018, 2019, and had a vote in 2020. It was just lying left, right, and center. You can't say that, but I can, because I know I was in the campaign, and as were some here. So they've been a bad actor. They like to talk up their good steps that they take in the community, and yet the rates in and of themselves, not the individual people who are fixing the power lines, but the rates in and of themselves are a bad action, not a bad actor, just a bad action, and that's a corporate policy from Rapid City or wherever. And it's cynically, I look at it and go, well, they wanted 13. Sorry, they wanted 10, so they asked for 13. That's one thing. It's a bargaining chip. It's a game. I made a presentation the other night saying it's a game. There's a lot of gaming going on here. So in the world of trying to cut through to these commissioners on this rate of return on equity where, God, they're asking for 10.5%? That's ridiculous compared to the national average of what, 9.4 or whatever it is, 9.5, 6, somewhere in there. Do I have to make a really cogent argument based on the numbers supporting it, or can I look at the national number and then look at how they compare to the nationals from my perspective and knock them on that front?
I think the best arguments have both, right? I mean, the best arguments have evidence, and some rhetoric, right? Do you tell the best story, and do you have some stuff to back it up, right? I think that, without saying, here's how you get, a lower ROE or not. I mean, it's whatever we're asking for, the best argument has both. And whether it's positive, if someone's listening that really wants them to earn 10.5, I guess they can make that argument the same way. But it's really the combination. I mean, I think if there's, you want to do a deeper dive, that's probably, my suggestion would be like on the written, comment side, and on, and then maybe you come and you give them the 2-minute version too, or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Do the commissioners care before we, spend energy to put together a presentation? We know from their numbers that they've lost 500 commercial customers in the last, few years. In the last year, they've lost 500 businesses. They're going to turn us into ghost towns if they're allowed to keep going on. But my question, and I think this is a fair question, is if we put something like that in our presentation, is that something that is even in their wheelhouse that they care about, or do they just want personal stories?
Yes, I think they care. I think by personal stories, I mean, where are you coming from? And so, if that's your interest or you're tied to that, at 500 businesses, that matters, right? All the way down to this is what it affects, how it affects my personal finance or my kids' personal finance or whatever. So I would say, evidence and stories, kind of no matter what their angle or matter. It's tying that to kind of that personal touch. I think is important too.
Right. So that number, and you put that number with the fact that we're a captive audience. We don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
They can just go right on shoving us into the ground ad nauseum. We don't. And I don't know whether, because I represent people, and I see how they suffer, and they believe me, in this town they do. There's a lot of that. So, but I just wondered if the big picture is something that they're interested in.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think they're interested in all pictures and all manners of evidence. I mean, these are big cases, and so sometimes the record is 90,000 pages, right? So don't be scared, right, to add more.
So on one of the slideshows you had previously that says industrial only pays 25%. Then you got businesses pays 33%. Then you got residents that one. The residential pays 42%. So who gives the industrial that rate?
Sure.
Let me get to it. The reason I'm getting to that. So one of your biggest companies that use the most electricity is probably Wholesome in this county. Mm-hmm. I worked there for 25 years, Union Griever for 18 years and stuff like that. But then you see the commercial companies who are suffering. But they used to pay 33%. The residentials are paying 42%. You go back to industrial, the majority of that money doesn't stay in Fremont County. It all goes to Switzerland, Holder Bank, Switzerland. That's where Hull is, HOL is Holder Bank, cement in many. And we don't see nothing but the property taxes from the industrial. But yet you got the commercials who are suffering, and you just heard that how many commercials are closing. Then you look at the residential, and you see that the people who are single mothers, single fathers, low-income people like that, with the increase of electricity going up to where their budget isn't going up, why do we justify that industrial gets that much of a rate when the commercial and the residential doesn't get any break?
Sure. First, let me say this is just an example. These aren't numbers from this case. This is just as an example to say how they break it up. But let me talk about the process, because this is a good question. So the commission, in this phase 2 part, is going to look at analysis that says different types of users cause the use in energy to go up and down like this. And generally, when a utility wants to build stuff, they look at how high their energy peak is. And for residential customers, unfortunately, like when we get home at 5 o'clock, everyone turns their lights on at the exact same time, and my kid runs down and gets on the PlayStation and all that. And so it makes a spike in energy like this. And so even though most of the day the system uses energy like this, they have to build a system that can accommodate that thing. And so they're going to look at all those different peaks, and they're going to assign costs to different classes. And that's like the first step. And then there's an argument amongst parties about exactly what you said. Well, that seems unfair for residential customers, right? For a lot of reasons. Some of it goes, out of state, some of it goes out of the country. Like, we only have one big industrial user, and they're doing really well, and they're not feeling it like the average residential customer. And so there's a lot of back and forth on that. And the commission sometimes considers mitigation. And mitigation is saying, okay, we developed this split, but we're going to take, instead of allocating $82 million to the industrial, we're going to allocate $100 million to the customer. And so that's this kind of art thing. So
Yeah.
they do that.
Yeah, because when I was working Wholesome, they, like you says, the peak in the afternoons, especially during the summer, we had to shut down the crusher. We had to shut down the raw mill, which is the biggest usage of the companies out there because of the increase of basically air conditioning going up.
Yep.
That was the biggest one. So we had to shut it down like 8 o'clock and couldn't start it back up till 8 o'clock. But I mean, it's just you see the customer classes, 25%, and you see the commercial and the residential. If they put it all together, it'd be better for all of us.
Yeah.
Instead of just giving, like it says, Wholesome with all our money, all the profits going out of the county and out of the state and to another country.
Yeah, I hear you. And like I said, the process is built to kind of take that into account. I mean, Wholesome, right, it uses, the plant runs kind of all the time, right? And so it kind of has like pretty flat usage. And then residential's, like you said, flips on the AC and turns on the lights and gets that peak. And then Wholesome probably participates in a program that they get paid. When everyone else flips on their lights, they shut their lights off and try to balance it out. And that's some of what's going on, here. But this is part of the case. And so the commission will look at, that. And so, if that's your interest, for example, you could give public comment that said, hey, I worked at Wholesome, and this is my experience with what we did. And, I'm concerned that the revenues go out of the country, and so I think they should kick in. And so I'm asking you, commission, to move some of the costs from residential to Wholesome, if that's your interest. I think. Yeah.
They just wrote a comment for you, Joe. Thank you.
I mean, I think one of the the challenge for us, is that we want zero. So we should all split 0.
Just like the city of Canyon City and Florence are interveners, Wholesome is also an intervener in this case as well. Doesn't come here.
I'm curious if the Department of Corrections and the federal prison aren't big users also, and are they interveners?
Can I answer partly that question? I don't believe they're interveners, but interestingly, I did run into the director of prisons today at a community relations meeting that the federal prison, state prison system, and local communities have these quarterly, I think, meetings, and had a brief conversation with her and have traded emails with her, and they do have concern. Now, they're not interveners. I'm hoping that my communication in the next day or two that I can convince them to get someone to comment, either at the public comment hearing or in writing. But they are concerned. I don't have any detail. The state DOC is concerned about the bills they already pay and whatever this increase might be. Federal, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. December 2nd.
So what's the deadline for all the comments? I know we have one coming up next week, but is there a hard deadline for written comments and things?
That's a great question. Katie just relayed to me that the hearing, the actual hearing, will start December 2nd. Okay? That will run until they have kind of gone through their process. So, usually a rate case takes, a week to 2 weeks. So we could see, the 9th, 5th through the 9th, or possibly, further than that, when, they're gonna take evidence. And so so I can't give you a hard date, but they will take public comment until the record closes. So the record is the last day of the hearing. I mean, essentially that's how they wrap it up. And they say, we've heard from all the witnesses, they've handled all their technical stuff they need to handle. The chairman's gonna say, okay, I'm gonna close the record and end the hearing. So I think it would be safe to say, the 5th would be my suggestion to you all. But it kind of gets amorphous at that point. So, early December would probably be the best on the written side, and then on the in-person or remote, that's November 19th here and December 4th, or I'm sorry, 5th remote.
It's not a question, did you have a place where you can go on the website and make your comment, your written comment? Is it on there somewhere?
Yes, so
Point that out, please.
okay, so on the commission's website,
Oh, okay.
there is a link to how to participate, and so that will give you information on how to do each of the comments sections.
And we will publish these slides to the city's website and Facebook page. Also, if you go to the city's website page, or website, canyoncity.org, and search rate case, we also have that link on that page as well.
Well, that's good to know the staff's doing a good job, because I don't see many city council people here tonight.
Just Andrea and I,
Yeah.
unless I miss somebody.
Commissioners, yeah, let's bring those.
I want to just mention, I have a few handouts left over from a meeting that we did earlier this week, and this is a one-pager called How to Comment at the PUC Public Comment Hearing on November 19th. And I think it has the information that we've been talking about tonight, kind of how to formulate your comment, what the website is if you want to file a comment online, and the email, you can email your comment to the PUC, you can call a phone number and leave a voicemail. So I have these, if anyone's interested, and we can send around copies of these.
Okay, let me point out here, first let me say, I really appreciate the opportunity to be invited down and to speak with you all. Anything that I can help with, I'll do my best. As I mentioned, if you have questions or want follow-up, here's how you can reach me. Here's my state email address and my state cell phone number. So if I can be of service or help out with anything, or our office can, we're more than happy to do so. And thank you all again. We look forward to seeing everybody next week. And I also have cards here too.
Bring a
Thank you,
friend.
everyone.